condemned all the more, truth to tell. For the clever man is constantly confabulating, and those confabulations are hardly restrained to matters of the intelligence. They very much extend to matters of the heart. It is, in fact, there where they operate most intensively and ruthlessly. When speaking to an object of which you are fond, or for which you feel contempt, when embracing them, or even when thrashing them mercilessly, you're not speaking to, embracing, or thrashing, whatever it is they might, in fact, be, but rather a sort of scarecrow which your imagination has fastened to them, and which conceals them, if it is true that they were ever actually anything in the first place, at least from your point of view. It is with this scarecrow that you converse. It is she whom you embrace, whom you kick to the ground on a whim, and without a second thought, a dime-store puppet whom you have created to serve your momentary needs, projections, and wants. You could not see this creature whom you've thus hidden, costumed, and manicured, if you tried. In point of fact, there is no way in which you could try, for to do so would imply that you had realized and acknowledged to yourself that it was only you who had constructed this theatre and her in the first place, this play, this actor, and that she was created, made of, and conjured out of nothing other than you. And yet, ironically, the image you have of her is every bit as shadowy and obscure as the one you have of yourself, the one you see when you look, puzzled, amazed, distrustful, shocked, and disgusted at your reflection in a mirror. It is only when you chance upon this creature in an utterly novel situation, especially one in which she is unaware of your presence, that you might suddenly see, to what will likely be your horror, this thing, this creature, this fictional woman of your own invention, composed, as she is, as they, and you, and we all are, of endless weird angles and imperfect flesh, stumbling along, in what you might never previously have observed, a comically absurd, unseemly, imperfect manner. At any rate, in a manner diametrically opposed to the way in which you had previously imagined her, she is suddenly now a creature, and a creature only, no longer a being with a name, much less a being with a name whom you loved or despised, but a creature comparable to those you'd far more likely encounter in a park, or forest, or zoo, phantasmagorical, incomprehensible, and profoundly disconnected from the reality in which you fancy it is, that you exist, hopelessly, other, with no use for, interest in, or possible means of engaging in any meaningful contact with you. And it is at such moments that you will suddenly look at your own outstretched hand, the extremities of your body, or your face in the mirror, and discover precisely the same thing. Some nameless creature, in a body as foreign to you as a rock, a boulder, a mountain, a planet, a galaxy, a thing spinning through space, with some apparent agenda which you cannot grasp, on which you are borne along, like some weeping tail of a comet, struggling to eject itself from one unhappy solar system into another, whose grass you've been told is somewhat greener, and to be preferred, like some bleeding hemorrhoid hanging off the arse of a testosterone-crazed male elephant, hell-bent on lacerating his rival, unable to see anything other than intermittent clumps of his own cells, drenched in rust-coloured blood, falling to the jungle floor, all the while clutching madly at his skin, limbs, and extremities, for fear he too will meet the very same fate, shaking himself violently, rattling his brain about in its idiot case of bone, blinking furiously and repeatedly enough to realize that no, he is you, and you are still just in that room, observing the woman whom you thought you loved, and who now sits there, staring into space, ignorant that you are watching, a thing from whom that dream-stuffed scarecrow of your own invention has fled, a thoroughly naked thing, clothed in this or that garment, it is true, but naked nonetheless, as naked as the chipmunk, which just scurried beneath her, and the jay about to fly over her head, denuded, defenceless, tottering on a tightrope poised above unspeakable tragedy and suffering, staring hopelessly ahead, oblivious of you and of everything other than her own little fables, the scarecrows, whom she too fastens upon others, whom she recognizes, and with whom she honestly and genuinely interacts as little and as infrequently as you do. Between you and her is a gulf wider than any in this most unlikely, unreal physical world. The gulf between two impoverished imaginations, long ago stuffed in iron-bound lockboxes and tossed into a bottomless sea. To approach her frankly and straightforwardly would be a surreal agony, in which the harpoon on which you are already impaled would only be thrust deeper, and then another would be stuck up your arse, through your entrails, and out your bloodied, jabbering mouth. You'd be doomed, if you were sufficiently foolish to approach her, to spout inanities from which you would both recoil in disbelief and horror. And then it would occur to you, the ailment has the most obvious and simple of cures. You need only imagine, intensely imagine, that you are the man of a yesterday in which you did not know this creature, one who had not yet met her, or that you are the man of a tomorrow in which you have both tired of and grown to loathe her, and all the illusions will then vanish of their own accord. This Sarah Bernhardt, of your own invention, acting in this play, authored by no one other than yourself, the lines of which you have compelled her to learn, or that you at least imagine you hear coming out of her mouth, as well as this alien, anonymous creature, whom you presently observe at a distance, this mysterious whatever she is, this thing, as foreign to you and your experience as a ferret, as an insect, as a reptile, as a piece of dried dung upon which you take care not to tread. So you're free. It's freedom, of a sort, freedom from her, and from your absurd and imaginary refashioning of her, at least. And yet, to yourself, be it that self with a name, a past, and a memory, or that terrifying creature that stares back at you from the mirror, whose outstretched hands you see but do not recognize, or, more correctly, recognize clearly, do not belong to you, of whom you are not, have never been, and will never be free, for the bastard chases, brutalizes, and eviscerates you, even in your dreams. The fear is that this self, in which you are incarcerated, will do the very same in death, at the moment of death, and through an eternity, as drenched with stupidity, boredom, terror, and pain, as the one to which you are presently condemned. Every night, you're down and out, in some hellish pit, with this fellow, mutilated by the dread of some dream, of tomorrow, of the fear that whatever bad tunes you seemed still able to occasionally hear or cough up are about to disappear into an inaudible ether, of all momentary beguilements vanishing, now that you're confronted with this awful Gnostic demiurge, the one who is not willing to lie to you, or to at least tell you soothing fables while he stabs you. You look about wildly, for any distraction, for any bit of nonsense with which to divert yourself, a victim on whom to lay hands, a fist to turn upon another or yourself. But it is not to be. Madness, in the face of truth, in the face of its ruthless sadism, is helpless. The reality is that each moment is now nothing other than an eternal death agony, and that, faced with having no more scarecrows to fasten on this or that mannequin, no lies that continue to be effective, for all the old one have removed their masks and fled. No bodies left, which might have once deflected, detained, deluded, or entertained you, but which now reveal themselves as nothing other than shoddily assembled bits of random internal and sense organs, thrown together in some two-bit factory, staffed by blind mole rats with nothing on their minds other than the shoddily assembled bits of random internal and sense organs of other blind mole rats, that, faced with this black hole of dysphoria, from which you will never again emerge, you acquiesce to go under, to drown, to not care whether yours shall be a dignified and noble exit, or a humiliating and absurd one, concerned only that it be quick. There is to be no more sadness or grief, no more scraps of the misguided hope in which you had previously indulged yourself. Between the 3 or 4 moments of inspiration, and the countless swallows, rumblings, excretions, greedy desires, and inanities burbling out of his mouth that constitute a man's life, we find the proper measure of his existence. And the truth is that the culmination of any life, well lived, or honestly lived, is a scowl of misery that he genuinely embraces only on his deathbed, the final acceptance of the dumb, blind intuition which has been growing in his guts and gnawing at him for decades. The admission that the world is, and that his life has been, nothing other than a nightmare. If then, on that deathbed, the horribly misshapen frown on his distorted and withered face reflects this reality, there will be, at least, some small shred, some hint on that face, which displays for all to see. This man has seen what's what. This man knows and understands, and is unwilling to push the truth down his gullet any longer, to coddle and embrace his filthy family members, to make amends, to give them the pleasure of a good death, which would allow them all to then return to their filthy hovels in which they live their coarse, vulgar lives, to slap themselves good-naturedly on the back, to primp and preen about like peacocks, and to flatter themselves what wonderful children or siblings they were. No, we'll have none of that at a good death. If that man who's leaving for no shore at all, rather for that idiot blackness, which preceded him, and to which he now returns, if he is to be at one with himself, to be honest about what he was, what they were, what all this was, well then, he will, if he has the strength, start violently up, and piss in their mouths, shit on them, if he is able, strangle them, stuff them in the hospice wastebasket. Let's make no mistake about this. It's only the dying fool who smiles and bleats generic platitudes to soothe his despicable relatives, while at the same time attempting cowardly to soothe himself. The legacy of his life has been nothing other than a series of stomachs, which have themselves been naught but crematoria for tens of thousands of creatures, snouts, cocks, cunts, lies, betrayals, assholes, pretending to be gardenias. Not a heart to be found amongst them, unless it has been stomped upon sufficiently to no longer care whether it is to be once again involuntarily displayed as some sort of cruel, perverse trophy. And then, it will either be discarded, or simply fold in upon itself and die. Its only remaining wish. Anyone who continues to live past a certain age cannot have done so without bathing himself in arsenic, stuffing himself with rot until he himself becomes rot. For rot, already decayed, can manage to keep itself in a state adjacent to life for many years, having already decomposed to such a large extent, there's nowhere much left to which he or it can aspire, or at which he or it can arrive. If there had been any momentary poetry within, it died long ago. He is now a wraith, whose only hope of overcoming his self-loathing, of achieving some sort of dime-store chivalry or high-mindedness, consists in comprehending, accepting, and incorporating the rot of which both he and the world is quite entirely composed. And that includes grasping hold of his hatred and clutching it to his breast, for it is above all else what he most cherishes, and what motivates him to keep inhaling the rancid air he must unwillingly share with all the beings whose throats he would so willingly and merrily slit. Oh, to live forever, to be that insomniac barber who'd put Sweeney Todd to shame, upon whose stylist's chair would sit kings, noblemen, vagrants, crones, girls, in their first blush of sensuous exaltation, children, fetuses ripped from the wombs of pregnant women who had sat upon that chair, but moments ago, enemies, lovers, former enemies, former lovers, a splendid time would be guaranteed for him and him alone. Of course, were I he, I would be compelled to speak with them first, taking care to entice them to their doom, in the most merry and cheerful of manners, as in, how's the weather, the missus, the children. The hypocrisies and inanities would cascade out of my mouth, barely betraying their mucus origins, streaming out like a fetid, polluted creek in some squalid, industrial backwater. Nothing, really, other than a bit of involuntary shitting, somewhat more convoluted, and a tad more pretentious, perhaps, but not a whit less mechanical, mindless, and moronic. I'd suck in my breath, and observe the words arising from some internal cesspool, of which I haven't the slightest knowledge. And yet, there they are, the occasional witticisms, 'tis true, but nearly always suffocated beneath the more usual barrage of inanities, which pour, like a fountainhead of caustic stomach acid, through my gullet, past my ill-kempt, rotting teeth, out of my unwashed lips, into the ears of a victim who hears nothing of what it was I'd imagined I'd intended, only what was judged sufficiently inoffensive, and perhaps soothing enough to make its way past the barb-wired fields of indifference and vanity with which every man surrounds himself. We can never simply leave it there. It is never enough. We must coddle, reform, resend our words. We can never simply leave them as they are, and deserve to be, rotting in the air, like some massive, unflushed shit in a foul-smelling public restroom, which, at the very least, has the dignity and decorum to not shuffle about overmuch, all the while spouting nonsense in an effort to draw attention to itself. We worship all these bits of shit we fling into the air. So fond of them are we that we can be distracted by them to the point of forgetting what their purpose was in the first place. To divert and distract the blockhead presently sitting upon our barber's chair from what is to momentarily descend upon him. Sometimes we are overcome by a wave of apathy, or even pity, if the lump, the imbecile, sitting there and babbling away, is ill in some obvious way, crippled, or perhaps just a jump or two from death, without any intervention required on our part. And so it is we let them go their tortuous way, as we would some pathetic rodent who'd been wounded in some way or other and had stumbled into our pantry. We would simply usher them out into the black night to die, with no further assistance from us. Were they to invade our living quarters, healthy, famished, with an agenda to nibble on this or that, to warm themselves in our bedclothes, or perhaps hide themselves away in some closet in which their purring, singing, or squealing gave them away, we'd smash their little brains into a pulpy, viscous puddle, which we would then scoop up, carry downstairs, and throw into that same black night in which their sick, wounded cousin would most likely still be dragging himself from bush to bush, deciding beneath which it would be most propitious, and perhaps even pleasant to expire. To nurse your hatred is the only really reliable source of joy, of sustenance, of indulging the passions. Keep a scroll within your mind of all the viciousness and depravity you have encountered in your life, a scroll which, were you to unfurl it, would stretch from here to the Kuiper Belt and beyond. You need not be witty or literary when recording these things. Just piss them cheerfully onto the parchment in all their blatant, naked dissipation and viciousness. Unfurl this scroll sufficiently in your mind so that you see its letters before your eyes throughout the day. Think of it as your little fuckfest with Jesus, the two of you on your own little road towards Damascus, your own little, ever-present fiery cross, which demands of you, no less than it did of Constantine, that by its sign you are to conquer, that is to say, you are to choke up, expel, and inflict your rage, disgust, and cruelty upon all those who cross your path. This is a theophany that will never desert you, a revelation that will enliven the remainder of your days, give you purpose, meaning, a will to drag your sorry ass out of bed each morning. Yes, purpose, meaning, in a world quite without either of those things. Your little revolt against the absurd shithole in which you find yourself. Camus would approve. Perhaps not of the garroting of throat after throat in your little shop of horrors, although one never knows. It's not like we can dig up and ask the blowhard. This hatred is not all. It is not meat nor drink to recast, miss. Millais. Neither slumber nor a roof against the rain. Hate cannot fill the thickened lung with breath, neither clean the blood, nor set the fractured bone. But enough of her, that drug-addled, narcissistic cunt. There is no need of flowery words here. Were you to lose your grip, your embrace of hatred, or when you lose them, for, rest assured, it can happen, suddenly, what do you know? There's the old bastard, death, standing there, stinking in a barrel of shit right beside your bed, filling you with the petty regrets you thought you'd discarded ages ago. You're suddenly this snivelling, apologetic, beat-up piece of garbage in a hospice bed, desperately trying to make amends with a world which you knew full well, when you were strong and your mind was razor-sharp, wasn't worth spitting on. You're suddenly this thing to be pitied, a sort of puppy dog with the face of a corpse, babbling out excuses and explanations, justifications and pretexts, all the shabby little griefs and expressions of remorse with which you wish to touch the hearts of the harpies attending you, and all the time knowing, were some miracle to occur, were you to suddenly regain your vigour, your clarity, yourself, you'd have it off with all these whores, these she-devils. When your body betrays you, your hatred, your lifelong and dearest friend, your daemon, is more than likely to flee, you may very well find that you've been cleaved from it, that you are alone, that you are nothing other than the filthy meat puppet of which you were first aware at 4 years old in the basement of a home populated by demons, fiends, and vampires. Hatred alone keeps such creatures at bay, and there is nothing that matters more than that, nothing to be valued more highly. And when others feel the force of this hatred, if you haven't first slit their throats, you know full well what the advantages of that are. They curse you and flee your presence, the little darlings. And what is more delightful than that, pray tell? One need never again be nice. One need never again castrate oneself when out and about, engaging in disingenuous chatter, in an attempt to be liked. What folly? Is there a greater folly? Rid yourself of it, and you will be free. And the measure of that hate is nothing other than the measure of your experience, its hopes, expectations, betrayals, and abuse, all that has ground you down to a weary, emasculated pulp of violent misanthropy and boiling rage. For what's the use? Of those who matter to us, for whatever wrong-headed, God-forsaken reason, we inevitably understand nothing. Of those who don't matter in the least, we understand all, though the knowledge is of little interest to us. At best, it offers us opportunities to manipulate, to take advantage of them, as if they were brute objects, which, truth to tell, they are. With the former, it is a very different story. We have the damnedest of times untangling ourselves from them. We impute our own intellect and passions to them, and see little in them apart from our own reflections, of which we ourselves understand next to nothing. It is as if they are mirrors within mirrors, and, hence, become the source of all sorts of bothersome anxieties, for when we worry about how they might react to us, how they feel or behave towards us, we are troubling ourselves, above all, with apprehensions concerning the state of our own souls, our nature, its worrisome flux and undependability. Who will I be tomorrow? Damn if it isn't dependent on her. Who is, after all, only me in a skirt or pantsuit, she onto whom I have fastened 1,001 attributes of myself, one a bit of free-floating love, another some poisonous globule of hate, either or both of which, laser-like, can be turned upon her, she whom I have constructed, at what feels like a moment's notice. It's all never much to do with her, or very little. It is, rather, only these dead weights, which I carry within myself, that sometimes thrill and sometimes ennoble me, but far more usually devastate me. People are props, and props only. We assimilate them easily into ourselves, unsurprisingly, for we are their origin. We shit-stain them with our viscera, our longings, our disappointments, and our needs. It can feel to us as if they are more important to us than our very selves, when, in fact, they are merely mirrored mannequins, onto whom we have projected, previously unknown, nether regions of ourselves, and, having done so, then allowed and encouraged them to burrow deep into these Elysian fields, these damnable hells we all carry within ourselves, just out of view, and throughout our lives, most of our waking lives, at any rate. Such persons, with their knack for unlocking these cryptic, clandestine caverns within ourselves, seem to reach deep within us, as we are only able to do when left to ourselves in passionate, longing-filled, and terrifying dreams, dreams from which we awaken, astonished that these underground chambers and catacombs exist within us at all, and that, in addition, they are teeming with the most fantastical and hallucinatory creatures, who do all sorts of things, at every moment, while we are fully awake, and even when we are engaged in the most insipid of activities. There they are, scurrying about in the bowels of our psyches, seducing us, enraging us, poking us with their little pitchforks, turning the reins this way and that all the while, even when we are having the most insipid of conversations with the most hopeless of ignoramuses. Cup your ear over the edge of the cliff, which is yourself, and listen carefully. You will likely hear them, scheming, contriving, pulling levers, operating steam engines, strutting about, busily writing notes on pads which will direct you to say this or that bit of nonsense, to have this or that dream, this or that nightmare, to stumble over your words, burp up the occasional witticism, to be gripped in a momentary death terror. These hobgoblins, all of whom are you? They're the cleverest of eavesdroppers, double agents, betrayers. They're the ones scampering about, in the throes of passions, of which you hadn't previously the faintest of clues were yours. That is, until some prop on your horizon, who has obviously caught their attention as well, throws them into a whirlwind of enthusiasm, of ardour, or of rage, which bubbles up from your bowels, and in which you then drown, the origin of which you attribute to some woman with whom you've become infatuated, though, truth to tell, you know not a thing about her, or to that man in the street who has so enraged you with his stupidity, arrogance, or bigotry, with whom you are unacquainted, and about whose past and motivations you are quite ignorant. They are nothing other than the starter, who, through waving his flag and shouting, "Go!" unleashes untold hordes of stallions within you, of whom you were up until that moment entirely unaware. But now, the race is on. There are no stewards about to oversee it, to ensure that it proceeds fairly, with kindness, or sanity. No patrol judges reporting infractions or violations. There is just this shit show of the most colossal dimensions taking place within you, which you attribute to that lovely gal with the heaving bosom, or to that perfectly idiotic, entitled twit, with the political opinions of which you do not approve. It's showtime. The adventure begins, once again. And yet you are, have ever been, and shall always be, the loser. These lovers, these object of your rage, they are no more real than the characters in a novel by which you have been moved or enlivened, whom you feel you know, and with whom you feel as if you have lived. As true as it was of those ethereal beings, so it is with these creatures of seeming flesh and blood, who toss you this way or that, in both mild weather and in storms whose winds and rains live only in you. It can be helpful, in such states of discomfort, which can even progress to actual madness, to attempt to vividly imagine who you were prior to ever encountering this being, and who it is you will be when they no longer have the slightest effect upon you, as if you are shaking yourself loose from some intense dream which has displeased or unnerved you. You are not a collection of lines in some accountant's book, that accountant being yourself. You are the literal accountant, the accountant himself, at this moment, and this moment only. A few seconds later, a minute later, you are now a very different accountant, taking note of assets and liabilities entirely different from what they were an instant ago. What is the above other than a bit of philosophizing? And what is philosophizing other than a pretentious outlet for one's existential terror? And is all of this not terribly fatiguing, engaging in this eternal lie to which one has so devoted oneself? Can we not simply say, simply admit, that we are profoundly disgusting, appalling, and outrageously absurd? Can we not at least claw back some minimal dignity in admitting as much? Of course, all men will then avoid us, for we are rubbing their noses in what they know full well, but will never dare to speak aloud. We are simply pointing to the rot which they are, which lives in them, which correlates quite precisely with the corruption and filth of their diseased bodies which they are busy hiding from both us and from themselves, busy, as they are, dressing up in absurd clothes, dabbing themselves with soaps and perfumes, which hide the atrocious odours, and excreta which dribble and sometimes pour out from them at every moment. How dare we, naked ourselves, and unwilling or unable to clothe ourselves, force them to unclothe, to observe their scandalous, putrefying meat suits in the harsh glare of an apathetic and exhausted sun, from which they run into darkness, into frocks, into games, into philosophy, at the very first opportunity? There is only madness and hypocrisy, and we, each of us, are wannabe Diogenes, we, who spew this vain nonsense from our rancid barrels, are no less absurd than the pompous, spectacled penguins upon whom we heave our venom. Here we sit, preaching gibberish, pontificating this or that bit of drivel, our self-abasements and loathing of them, cut from the very same cloth, and stitched through with every bit as much navel-gazing grandiosity as is the twaddle of all those who parade into our little cottage industries of grandiosity, our spiders' webs of pontifications and denunciations. When we rant, jabber, and behave in this manner, are we not every bit as absurd, every bit as deluded as the objects upon whom we shower our contempt? And mustn't we, to be even minimally honest with ourselves, factor into our calculations the perfectly odious being everyone else thinks we are? They, every bit as wrong in their judgments and opinions as we, must needs rule the day by the simple fact that they are the majority. They are every one and everywhere. Of course, we see, perfectly clearly, that they are all the worst sorts of miscreants. But then they, to the very last man, think the very same of us. When 100 monkeys shower their shit upon some unfortunate visitor at the zoo who has come to simply observe them, and who perhaps finds them quaint, it is he, and not they, who is the deserving object of ridicule, a hopeless, pompous fool. Speaking of shit, why is it that we are made so terribly uncomfortable by constipation? Clearly, it's no picnic. There is palpable discomfort. But constipation causes a distress, and contains a disquiet and uneasiness, far beyond that of some other simple, straightforward discomfort, which, had we reliable neurological measures of just how many pain neurons were firing during each, would be its objective equivalent. The anxiousness and consternation arise simply from the fact that, when constipated, we cannot rid ourselves of the notion that we are not a great deal more than a tube full of shit, that this, above all else, above all, our prattling, our philosophies, our compositions of novels and symphonies, that this is who and what we, at bottom, are. Hence it would follow, and does follow, that when a severe bout of constipation is relieved by the good fortune of suddenly being able to push some massive dragon out of our bowels, he who had previously been hiding in his cave, sleeping peacefully like Fafnir, oblivious to everything, above all, to our sufferings, that when we explode in this manner, it is as if we are experiencing a sort of Christian rapture, a much longed for and seemingly effortless ascent into heaven, a blissful Arcadia in which our bodies are, for the moment, and only for the moment, not the source of abominable physical and existential torment. We've all experienced this. This is no revelation. What remains in all this, that is perhaps worth our further pondering, is the burden with which all of us so constantly walk the earth, which we carry at every moment of our waking life. Nay, not just our waking life, for shit infects, inhabits, and steers the course of our dreams as well. And so, at the moment we are able to rid ourselves of some significant fraction of this shit, we feel, for a fleeting moment, a sense of freedom, of existing in some unbounded, ethereal space, in which we are somewhat less the usual bag of putrefying viscera housing, piss, shit, blood, spit, bile, sweat, mucus, semen, menses, lymph, and tears, untold, countless tears, infinite tears, very few of which we are able to let pass through us, most of which grip us in a lifelong chokehold of suppressed grief. We are strangled, haunted beings, death-haunted worms, desperate to forget all of which we are made, to forget all that we are. One can proffer all sorts of romantic nonsense about how the angelic spirit we truly are has been chained to a thing quite other, to the filthy, execrable body, that we are made of the purest ether, that our authentic selves exist in some empyrean realm. The reality is quite other than this. We are not some temporary, seraphic passenger fastened to the back of a mad beast who tosses us this way and that. We are a pustule on that creature's arse, an abscess which has been unfortunate enough to grow pairs of ears and eyes, which are usually more than sufficient to observe and experience the horror of the situation in which we find ourselves. And so here we sit, temporarily relieved of some fraction of the mushy blobs and cracked sausages which a moment ago had plugged full our lower bowels, smiling as if this moment of relief could possibly be anything other than a moment, coddling our psyches with fairy tales concerning the illusory nature of time. How, in each moment, there lies an eternity, all that hocus-pocus, airy-fairy nonsense, with which persons facing what they full well know will be abominable torments in the very near future, repeat to themselves in their inner ears, with a voice that they're not quite sure is their own, but which is, at the same time, somehow familiar. Ah, yes, that daemon which so often drops in to catastrophize about this or that horror about to take place on this or that date, which whispers the most appalling judgments on persons absent, some fraction of whom might deserve these libels, but most of whom do not, which is known full well to the inner voice which continues to whisper the indictments, which, in fact, the more it is aware of their innocence, the more it redoubles the force of its vitriol. It is, somehow, this very same daemon which now, incomprehensibly, for it is so terribly out of character, for it begins to confabulate the purest nonsense about all the infinities and eternities which lie within us, and of which we are tasting at this particular moment. This moment when we happen to be somewhat, literally, less full of shit than we are ordinarily, that, somehow, we might remain in this moment, to linger in its blissful light, to step out of time into a shit-free firmament in which the body is discarded, where we are free to hover, unbounded, in celestial spheres, in which shit and guts and bloated bellies and the multitudinous varieties of excretory muck dripping from these wretched bodies to which we are fastened, and which we ourselves, in fact, are where all of that is gone, and surely for good. There cannot possibly be a demiurge cruel enough to yank us back into the cesspool of filth from which we've somehow managed to disentangle ourselves, the fetid, grief-choked swamp through which our stinking bodies wander moment to moment. No, it is not possible. When I say to the moment flying, linger a while, thou art so fair, our ruin is far less profound and literary than is Faust's. For us, it is rather more mundane. The inevitable gorging ourselves later that very same day, sending platoons of the dead down our gullets to their watery graves, to fester and metamorphose, and advise us of their doings, with the most insidious squealing and cramps, all of them omens of the constipated, bloated hell that once again awaits us, the one into which that idiot inner voice had just been attempting to assure us we would never again be thrown, having forever surmounted the vexation of being hung upon the meat hook of the body's incessant needs, pains, and betrayals. But when we are, for that moment, free of the body, or so we tell ourselves, what is it that actually then appears before us? What does the voice tell us now that we've taken its rubbish about time and the eternity of the moment halfway seriously, now that it need not barrel onwards with its sermon, given that it has beaten us into a sort of temporary, happy-for-the-moment submission, we are left with the notion that we must now do something. We can't just sit here, for goodness sake. Yes, it is wonderful to be, to a large extent, not full of shit. For that we are grateful. We'd be the last to deny it. And perhaps we are sufficiently obtuse to take the reassurances of our inner voice to heart, to at least pretend to ourselves that we believe both it and them. But surely, aren't we now to do something? Sitting here modestly shit-free seems somehow insufficient, lazy, unsatisfying. And now it confronts us, this oppressive, agonizing question. What are we when we are unaware, or less aware, of being a bag full of shit? When are we when we are not suffering? Why are we alive? For what purpose? Surely, if it is only the constant suffering which distracts us from all this, then clearly there is no reason to live. Oh, I know. We must produce something. That's it. That's the answer. Thank goodness. Now we're saved. Now it will all be all right. Or at least bearable. We'll do things, produce things. Perhaps one or two others might even take a modicum of pleasure in those things. Although we shall do them, first and foremost, only for ourselves. There'll be no stopping us. We will do this, do that, busy ourselves with the most meaningful of enterprises, hop to, let's not sit about, we must, drum roll, begin. Because, for fuck's sake, something needs to happen, no? I know. Well, speaking for myself, at least, I shall write a memoir. That's it. No, hold on. That won't work. I've had no life. I know. I shall fall in love. I shall garden. Crochet. Oh, much better. I shall do crossword puzzles. Watch all those old classic films. Practice the piano. Walk the dog. Perhaps come up with a melody. Or, I know, a poem. I must write a poem. That's it. How hard can it be, after all? And then, having written the poem, I shall... Wait a minute. Submit that poem. No, that's stupid. No one will care. And, even were they to care, I don't concern myself in the least with the opinions of strangers. No, that won't do. There will be no submission. Yet, nonetheless, a poem there shall be. And when I'm dead, perhaps it will be read at my funeral. That's how bloody good it will be. And there'll be weeping, the most wonderful remembrances, and toasts, and... Hang on a moment. I am suddenly reminded that I don't give a damn about the opinions of strangers. In point of fact, I no longer give a damn about anyone's opinion, including those of the few I claim or pretend to love, and the fewer still that might, if pressed, admit, claim, or pretend to love me. I don't give a damn what they think or feel either. I wish them well. Yes, surely. I love them. Mustn't I wish them well? Well, of course, there's no question of that. How silly to countenance a doubt on such a matter. Of course I wish them well. I love them. Do I not? But what they think or feel no longer matters, and I ask myself, in the wee hours of the morning, why it ever mattered. For at one time it did, quite intensely, horribly, and often I thought about, nay, obsessed about what they thought and felt constantly. There was nothing that mattered more. But that was only a dream, surely. None of that happened. Really happened. I only imagined it. Perhaps only dreamt it. Well then, perhaps I am dreaming this as well. What do we owe the phantoms with whom we inhabit our dreams? Are they not merely ourselves? Well, of course they are. But then I need ask, are these not the thoughts of an absolutely ghastly person? Surely only the most repulsive wretch would have such thoughts, such apathy, such cruelties within his heart. But hold on. Surely the more I judge myself, the more right I have to judge others. That must surely be the case. How could it be otherwise? I am only bloody doing unto others as I am bloody doing to myself. So that's the end of it. Right. Quite right. Problem solved. I am nothing, a vile beast in a snake pit upon whom it is not worth pissing. And so it follows, necessarily, that they must be as well. What a relief. I was confused there, for a moment. Okay then. What was it? Gardening? Oh, I recall. A poem. I must write a poem. But what is it to be about? There is nothing to write about. The world is a desert. There is only this monstrous emptiness, which begins within me and proceeds outwards. Although I may have that quite ascend, it might well be the other way round. In any case, I know it is a mistake. This world, the universe itself, is a trivial gaffe, worthy only of scorn. We are not to bother ourselves with any of it. I shall wear purple, as those soon-to-be old broads say. Yes, I shall wear purple, garden, write poetry, perhaps a villanelle. How hard could that be? There's that, do not go gentle. 1. Perhaps I might crib something from that. While I garden, I'll bring a pen and paper. Oh, and a pad. Yes, a pad. Okay then, it's all settled. Oh dear, I'm so tired all of a sudden. But I do believe I might quite be able to nap now, given my shit-free guts. If only that perpetual voice in my head would stop with its nonsense. Oh wait, that is only I, just another bit of me, a sometimes clever, but far more usually terribly irksome and annoying part of me. But it is all of me that is exasperating. When all is said and done, okay, there's an idea for a poem. I need a slam-bang couplet now. That's what a villanelle requires. A resounding, dramatic couplet. Surely I can dredge one up from somewhere. From deep within my bowels. Shit-free as they are at the moment. This must be what they call poetic exhilaration. Yes, I am unquestionably in the throes of poetic exhilaration. How long would it last? Hopefully at least until I've got my couplet. Would digging in the garden be of any help? Enable my bowels? Perhaps distract them from the task? How am I to know? Oh dear, I am tired. So very tired. Perhaps it's to simply be a poetry-free nap, then. I'll lower my expectations and be satisfied with that. They say that's the royal road to happiness. They do. This lowering of one's expectations. A bit hard for a morbid pessimist, such as I, but feasible nonetheless. There is always a lower, to which one can descend. Until, well, you know, there is one no longer, until the bottom has been reached, in which one's body spasms in horrendous pain and expires. But I shan't trouble myself with any of that right now.